Frank Lloyd Wright has been hailed the most significant American architect of all time, producing an astounding body of 380 works during his 72 years of life, and designing over 1,000 more, many of which have since been constructed. Wright's influence extends far beyond the Modernist movement in built form. He was an author, theorist, educator and artist. Greatly impacted by his childhood, the natural environment and human connection to it, Wright's works continue to impact the way we live, design and inhabit space today. In our presentation, we will aim to explore the ever-changing nature of interiors by discussing the geographic, economic, social, political, material and technological forces that impacted Frank Lloyd Wright's key architectural styles of prairie, Usonian and organic, by examining exemplars of each and looking at how Wright's works continue to influence design today. Frank Lloyd Wright spent many summers farming the land which he would later purchase to build Taliesin, a home initially begun in 1911, where he would spend the majority of his life and which is credited as being the finest example of his prairie style. Set on the brow of a hill, it was Wright's intention that the home was to be of the hills, hence the Welsh name Taliesin, meaning shining brow. The prairie style was what Wright envisaged to be a democratic, all-American architecture, although it was influenced by Japanese design, the arts and crafts movement, feminism, and Wright's own held progressive social ideals. Prairie homes were often designed for the affluent in rural settings, not the city, taking advantage of and responding to the natural landscape, whilst rebelling against the inherent architectural norms of the 19th century, industrialisation, and the mass production narrative of the Victorian age. Characteristics of Wright's prairie style included the use of brick and stucco, open, symmetrical floor plans with strong massing, low, flat roof lines, deep eaves, and the use of cantilevers. Internally, wood banding, natural material palettes, restricted ornamentation, and Wright-designed furniture and joinery were the norm. Taliesin displayed many of these quintessential prairie elements, featuring large and inviting windows and walls handcrafted from local yellow limestone and nearby river sand. Petroglyph boulders discovered on the site were integrated into the interior, acknowledging Indigenous occupation, human movement, and reinforcing the welcoming nature of the home, free of gender and radical social segregations that were prevalent at the time. Rebuilt in 1914 and again in 25 after tragic fires, Taliesin was both home, studio and farm all under one roof. Its design allowing for private and public spaces to blend with each other, pushing against the sterile nature of architecture at the time and the segregation of gender roles within their interiors. The estate is still home to the School of Architecture established there by Wright in 1932, is the headquarters of the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation, and Taliesin, the flagship of prairie design, is visited by over 120,000 people each year from around the world. Its progressive design and interiors continue to impact how we design and occupy space today. It was during the Depression era of the 1930s, following on from the First World War and a period of great personal loss and limited architectural expression, that Frank Lloyd Wright started to build upon his democratic ideals for an all-American design aesthetic by introducing his utopian ideal of Usonia, and at its centre, the Usonian house type, an affordable, well-built and socially applicable housing solution for all Americans, not just the elite, free of the influence of Europe and fulfilling what Wright saw as the Jeffersonian ideal of land and home ownership as the birthright of all Americans. Usonia, taking its name literally from the United States of North America, was explored in Wright's book The Disappearing City of 1932, where Wright reinforced his long-held disdain for city dwelling and introduced his suburban ideal of the broadacre alternative. It was from this concept that Usonia, which was a New York co-living development of the 1940s consisting of a small network of circular living blocks with shared ownership, that found its roots. This unique social experiment has inspired generations of people seeking to live in alternate communities with green co-ownership ideals in locations all around the world. Usonia, like the Usonian housing model itself, was not a complete success, with often spiralling costs. However, Wright's first attempt at the home, in the form of Jacob's House 1 of 1936-7, was perhaps his most successful. Built for journalist Herbert and wife Catherine Jacobs on a budget of $5,000, equivalent to $110,000 today, this technologically advanced home was laid out on a modular grid for cheap, standardised production, related directly to nature by using locally sourced wood, stone, baked clay bricks and glass curtain walls. Devoid of unnecessary ornament, materials were given a waxed finish to keep costs low, and small boilers circulated water through steel pipes embedded within the thin concrete slab of the house for underfloor heating. Revolutionary for the time, the kitchen was situated to place the housewife within the heart of the home, directly connected to the eating area and the openly arranged living wing, so that meals could be prepared and the family interacted with simultaneously. The fireplace, often ritually included by Wright as a central feature, is included here in simplified form, meeting the need for warmth and communal gathering within the home. The car, essential for suburban dwelling, is accommodated with its own covered carport incorporated into the design. Jacob's House 1 was a revolutionary modern home, providing well-designed, affordable and socially relevant housing for middle-class Americans. These ideals continue to be globally relevant, and the design approaches explored here continue to feature in Western domestic architecture. Frank Lloyd Wright first used the term organic architecture in 1908. However, Wright often attributes his interest in natural form to his childhood upbringing in the Wisconsin River Valley, an area that would continue to inspire him throughout his career. His design philosophy focused on three main components: human life, nature, and the built environment. He believed structures should blend organically into their surroundings, embracing colours, textures, and materials. Wright wanted to improve people's lives by changing the way they occupied space. By dismantling cultural norms, Wright set about designing purposeful spaces with zoned and open layouts that facilitated social movement, temperature control, and accessibility. He had a natural interest in sustainability, reflected in his designs, and it's this progressive approach that makes his work so relevant and inspirational to designers in our modern economic and social climate. His engineering knowledge allowed him to combine materials like wood, stone, glass, concrete, and brick to create amazing organic curvature and forms that seemingly defied gravity. Wright may have introduced the term organic architecture to the ever-changing social, political and economic climate in which he designed, but this was something Indigenous peoples had been doing for centuries. Japanese architecture is often attributed as a major influence on his work. However, Wright would claim Japanese architecture merely confirmed his own ideas about organic forms rather than inspired them. Regardless of the influence, Wright's designs are distinctive and one of a kind, drawing on new and old techniques to create spaces that embraced individuality and craftsmanship, resulting in aesthetically pleasing and practical designs. Taliesin West, Falling Water, and Norman Lyke's house are considered some of his best organic works, but perhaps his finest is realised in the Guggenheim Museum. As one of his last architectural creations, it is regarded as his final masterpiece. In 1943, Solomon R. Guggenheim commissioned Wright to design a museum in New York City. After various delays and setbacks, construction began in 1957, and the Guggenheim opened in October 1959. One of the requirements of this museum, intended to house modern, radical works of art, was that it must be unique in design and unlike any other previously constructed. Today, the Guggenheim boldly claims that Wright challenged and forever changed the relationship between art and architecture and the way architects themselves design spaces for viewing art. Many of the materials utilised in its creation were innovative: reinforced concrete, glass and steel. Sprayed concrete, a relatively unknown building material in the 1940s, was used extensively, demonstrating how advanced Wright's design approaches were. Wright's organic works have inspired generations of architects, just as he himself was inspired by others who came before him and worked alongside him. Masters of our modern design, Zaha Hadid, Daniel Libeskind and Frank Gehry, have all been encouraged by Wright's legacy to explore polarizing structures that test the fundamental ideals of form and function within the material and social constructs of their time. It is clear that Frank Lloyd Wright was revolutionary and will forever have a lasting impact on the design world. As we have seen, Wright's influence on modern architecture and interior design is vast. He produced works not only in America, but also in Japan and Germany. Many young creatives studied under his tutelage at his architectural school, while many others continue to draw on his works for inspiration. In Australia, his influence can be traced back to Federation. From 1901 to 6, Walter Burley Griffin and wife Marion worked under Wright. In 1911, they won a competition to design Australia's capital city of Canberra. Their winning design conveyed ideas of democratic and organic architecture, and a use of pattern and form from nature, no doubt influenced by their time with Wright. In 1914, the Griffins set up a new architectural practice in Sydney and Melbourne and introduced Australia to the Prairie School of Architecture. Another Australian landmark, the iconic Sydney Opera House, designed by Danish architect Jorn Utzon in 1957, has a connection to Wright also. Utzon admired Wright's ideals and even visited the American architect at the end of the 1940s. Utzon's own home in Helleback, Denmark, was inspired by Wright's Usonian houses, and it was here that he began to work on the opera house design. In the early 1950s, the Sydney School of Architecture adopted Wright's organic approach to design, in contrast to the sharp, stark steel and glass of the international style. Architects in the Sydney School, often faced with challenging bushy sites, use local natural materials to bring the outdoors in. As Wright's organic style gained followers around the world, Australian architects weren't just influenced by Wright directly, but also by his younger followers in America and Scandinavia, particularly Finland's Alvar Aalto. Australian architects Peter Fuller, Russell Jack, Neville Grossman, David Godsall, and Bruce Rickard were all inspired by Wright's works and writings. We thank you for your time and hope this presentation has been helpful in understanding the ways in which Frank Lloyd Wright worked with and responded to the needs, advancements and challenges of his era, being heavily influenced by his own life, the works of those who came before him, practiced alongside him, and by the natural environment which he so greatly admired and drew on for inspiration. With a lasting legacy that's difficult to quantify, we owe much to the works and thinking of the modern master, Frank Lloyd Wright.